Jai Hind everyone. I am Karuna Singh, Assistant Professor in the Department of Applied Sciences and Humanities at Akgec. Today I am here to deliver a lecture on barriers to communication. The topics that we will be covering today are what are communication barriers, what are the different types of barriers, and how to overcome these barriers through the communication. In the last lecture, we discussed the process of communication. We were discussing the process of communication where we had sender, where we had receiver. Okay, and there was a medium through which communication was going on. Now, when we understand what is communication barrier, the barrier or the obstacle that happens in the medium or to the sender or to the receiver. So what happens when a communication is going on? There are some obstacles, some hindrances that distort or interrupt or block the effective exchange. Now, when communication is going on, the sender is sending some information, the message that sender is sending to the receiver, it is going to somehow receive to the receiver. But whether it is effective or not is what the question arises. So, communication barriers are obstacles or hindrances that distort, interrupt, or block the effective exchange of information between a sender and a receiver. Now, what happens when there is a communication barrier between the sender and the receiver? It reduces clarity of message, whether the message is clear or not. It creates misunderstandings. What if the sender wants to say something else to the receiver, but due to these obstacles and hindrances, the receiver understands something else. So it's create misunderstandings between the sender and the receiver, which hampers their relationships also. It prevents an intended message from being received accurately. Now, this is the most important aspect, that effective communication not happens because of these barriers, which leads to the issue of accurate. Now, whenever you want to share some information, now we need to check the information we are sharing, or even for that matter, we understood that communication is exchange of information, ideas, feelings, and your expressions. So when you are expressing it, whether it is accurate or not is what decides the effective communication. Now, due to these barriers, this accuracy falls and there is a lack of communication. So anything that hinders the effective exchange of ideas between sender and receiver is what the barriers of communication is. In simple terms, they are roadblocks. Now, what is roadblocks? You are walking on a road and there are few blocks that has been created, so you cannot go beyond this. In the same way, when you are communicating with the receiver, there are few barriers that are hindering that communication. For example, you want to convey some information to me, let's meet for the lunch. Okay. Now, there might be many issues in the surrounding, there might be unclarity in your information, or when you were telling me, I was listening to something else. So, all these problems that are surrounded among us, to which we are surrounded, leads to the barriers and leads to the ineffective communication, and they can also be called as roadblocks in the communication process. Now, this leads to misunderstanding, confusion, and inefficiency. Now, example. Now, when I am doing some meeting, there is a noise in a meeting. So, whatever important agenda I wanted to discuss, whatever important information I wanted to discuss, that will lag behind, and all that will left is noise. Okay. Then use of jargon. Whenever you are using some technical jargons, for example, you come and start talking to me about your particular job, your particular thing, or your particular course that you are studying, and I'm unaware about it. What will happen? I won't be able to understand a single thing, and there is inefficiency in the communication. And then emotional stress. Now, these example leads to different types of communication, different types of barriers to the communication, which is our next slide, that is different types of barriers. So as I told you, this is sender, this is receiver. Now when the communication is going on, there are so many problems that happens, which is what barriers to communication is. Now there are many different types of barriers. We are going to discuss these 6 barriers of communication. The first one is physical, the second is psychological, semantic, cultural, organizational, and structural barrier. Now moving to the very first barrier, that is physical barrier. We understand with the word only that physical, something that is present in the surrounding. That is what physical barrier is. Physical barriers occurs when the environment or surrounding, what it does, it blocks the communication channel. So this particular communication barrier is making the hindrance in the medium. Again, I will tell you, there was a process, sender, receiver, medium. Now this particular physical barrier is creating problem in the channel. So where is the problem? In the channel, in the medium. This is what physical barrier is doing. What are the common causes that leads to physical barrier? The first one is noise. Because if I'm speaking and you start making noises, for example, I'm teaching in a class and few students start shouting and few students start talking among themselves. Whatever information I want to share to you, it won't reach to you. Okay, distance. If I am sitting in this room and you are sitting in the another room, or for example, I'm standing here and you start standing far away from me, and I start shouting. Maybe I was not, my pitch is not that high and I'm not that audible enough to you. There will be a barrier which will be due to the distance. And third is faulty equipment. For example, I have given some information on the WhatsApp. Okay, now your WhatsApp is not working because your equipment is not correct. For say your phone has fallen and it has broken. So due to which there are few glitches in the phone, you are not receiving the message, which might be due to your poor network also. So due to poor network or faulty equipment, the information is not being shared. For if you're watching this video and while watching this video, your internet start buffering. Your internet, there is a poor network and there is no network. So what happens? The information, the whatever I'm teaching to you right now won't reach to you. So that also is due to the physical barrier. Then weak lightning. If you are studying in the room and there is only one bulb or tube light and it has very low light and you are trying to turn your pages and start studying, but you won't be, because there will be a pressure on your head and you won't be able to see the clearly whatever you want to see. And that's when this weak lightning is also falling under the category of physical barrier. And then overcrowded space, as I mentioned, if there is a room full of 60 or 70 people and you want to deliver something, there is a high possibility out of those 70, only 5 or 6 might be listening to you and others might be hearing to you. And other than these two categories, few might not even care, might not care enough to look at you and listen or hear what you are saying. So overcrowded is also one of the factors that affects the communication, because you need to have that pitch, you need to have that tone, you need to have that pace to cover the mass when you are speaking. Now, let's take an example that during an online class, as I have taken this, if we take during this video lecture also, poor internet leads to unclear audio and video, message is lost. Now, for example, during COVID, we all were taking online classes somehow. So while delivering the lecture, or you while taking the lecture, what used to happen that due to poor network, you used to come in the Google Meet and the audio is not audible, or we used to ask, am I audible or am I visible or not? And few of you used to say, ma'am, the internet is not working, or ma'am, there is some problem in the Google Meet. You used to again leave them, exit the meet and again used to join. So what was happening? It was not just hampering the lecture for you or for me, it was also hampering the lecture for the people who were in that Google Meet. So what is being lost? The message, the information, the whatever I wanted to teach you was lost because of poor internet that falls under physical barrier. Then how does it affect the communication? Messages are not heard or seen clearly. That is what physical barrier is. Now there are different types of physical barrier. which we have discussed in the quite few times, that one is environmental noise in the environment, distance, one of the factor, physical obstructions, poor lighting, bad acoustics, technological failures like poor network, overcrowding, inadequate infrastructures. Then we go to the psychological barrier. Now, these occur due to mental or emotional state. Okay. Now, these mental or emotional state could be of anyone. It could be of sender. It could be of the receiver. It is not limited that sender is the one who is, if not emotionally stable, then only the information cannot be sent. But if the receiver is also falling under psychological distress, will affect the communication. Okay. Now, what comes under psychological barrier? Stress, anxiety, fear, low self-esteem. When generally we have seen that when we ask someone some questions in the class, for example, and few students, they know the answer, they know what they want to deliver, but due to their low self-esteem, or we can sometimes we also call it confidence, they don't speak. Now, they know the information. That means if they would speak, if the sender would speak and deliver the correct information to the receiver, the message will be effective. But due to their low self-esteem or due to their confidence, they are not speaking. So what is creating a barrier? The psychology of the receiver or psychology of the sender, or lack of attention can also prevent effective listening. Okay. If you don't pay attention to the class, you won't be able to understand. Now, your attention, you are sitting in a class and you are thinking of something else. So, we generally give example of this, that mentally you are, physically you are here, but mentally you are somewhere else. That somewhere else is nothing but the barrier to the communication. Now, example, a student worried about exams may not fully listen to the teacher's instructions. For example, there is we are sitting in a room where exams are happening, exams are going on, and I am giving some instruction that you have to take 2 marks question in this way, do not overwrite on the paper, do not do this, write roll number. And one student is very anxious about the exam. He is worried, what if I forget something, what will I do, I have not studied one chapter. That person will not listen to my instructions and may even further contribute to more problems. That is that he might or she might not be able to fully understand how he or she has to solve the paper. Now, how does it affect the communication? People filter or distort messages based on emotions rather than the facts. Now, we have heard that people say, I said something else, but when it reaches to the destination, it became something else. Now, how does it happen? It happens because you are not focusing more on the facts, or rather on the emotional aspect of that information. If I've shared that this is for say I've discussed something with someone, okay, I have expressed myself. Now, this person, if will not focus on my facts, that this is what I have heard, this is what I listened to the person, that is why I'm sharing. But because this person has some relation with that third person about whom I am talking, will not be able to understand the message properly and will have a barrier of emotions. Okay. And so what are the causes of the psychological barrier? One, suspicion and prejudice. If you have the feeling of hatred for someone, you won't be able to understand what that person is trying to say, and you won't even try to understand what that person is trying to say. Defensiveness and fear. This is the very common problem of defensiveness, that we don't want to listen where we are wrong. If someone says, this is the problem that you have done, this is where you are wrong, and that's when our defensiveness starts. So what happens? That we cannot even correct ourselves, and the communication, the purpose of the communication is left behind under your defensiveness and fear. Third is resistance to change. Because we don't like changes, we don't want to change, we won't be able to listen, and we will just say, okay, don't tell me what to do, I know what I should do. So the resistance to change is also one of the psychological barrier. Emotional state, maybe you are not in a state to listen to everyone, you are not in an emotional state that you want to understand what someone want to say, so you won't try to even understand what person is telling you or what information that person is trying to deliver. Selective perception. Now, from this selective perception comes another barrier, that is perceptual. That is perceptual. perceptual barrier. Now this perceptual barrier is basically when the barrier happens due to your different perceptions. You have selected some norms, you have selected some stereotypes which you don't want to change. Your perceptions, your point of views, your opinions, you don't want to change them, whether they are correct or wrong. If they are wrong, then also you are not changing, then it is a barrier to the communication. Then there is distraction and inattentiveness. Now, what is a distraction? For say you are sitting in a class. Now, when you are sitting in a class, a teacher is teaching you, but you are thinking of something else only. That is a psychological barrier. Okay. So, what are the causes? Suspicion and prejudice, defensiveness and fear, resistance to change, emotional states, selective perceptions, which leads to perceptual barrier, and then distraction and inattentiveness. Then comes the another barrier, that is semantic. Now, this semantic barrier talks about the language. Okay, let's understand one aspect of semantic barrier, that is language. If I know Hindi and you know English, okay, or take it vice versa, if I know English and you don't know English and I keep on speaking in English just for the communication, will you be able to understand anything? No. For say if I know Hindi and you don't know Hindi and I keep on talking in Hindi only, then you won't be able to understand anything. That is what falls under semantic barrier, when the language does not match between the sender and the receiver. Now, other than this language, there are few other things that also affect the communication. That is the words you are using. Okay, the symbols that you use. Some symbols in your some symbols might be different for you, but they might be different for someone else. The jargon, that is technical jargon that you use, are not understood by the receiver, and that's when the communication is ineffective. Misinterpretation of words, different meanings, or excessive use of technical terms can confuse. So this technical terms is basically what jargon is. And misinterpretation of words, you wanted to say something else and the person who is listening to you or the person on the receiver ends get something else and misinterpret it. And in the same way, different meanings also. One word can have different meanings, and because you wanted to say something else but the receiver understood and taken it in another way, would also lead to ineffective communication. For example, doctor uses heavy medical terms while explaining to a patient who does not understand. It happens most of the time that if we go to the hospital and the doctor starts giving you the medical terms that this is what happened to you, this is the problem, this is less, that is more, you need to put control over the. Now, we as a person who is not in the medical field won't be able to understand, which will lead to ineffective communication, and that is one of the barrier, that is semantic barrier. Now, how it affects the communication? It leads to misinterpretation of the message. Doctor wanted to say something else, you understood something else. Teacher wanted to say something else, you understood something else, and that is when the semantic barriers plays a role. Now, common causes of semantic barriers. One is denotative confusion. Words with multiple definition can cause confusion. Connotative differences. Some words carry emotional weight. So what happens? You say something to me and maybe that one particular word or one particular statement that you say has triggered me. Now, since that has triggered me, I have fallen into psychological barrier. Now, there is a role playing. Semantic barrier and psychological barrier together combinedly creates a barrier. How? Because of a word, I have fallen into an emotional state. A state that affects me. And so, semantic and psychological leads to a barrier of communication. Use of jargon and technical language, as I have mentioned and given example of doctor. Idioms and figurative language. Expressions can confuse non-native speakers. If you're saying something else and your expression shows something else, can also lead to barrier. Dialect and regional language. Obviously, different people have different dialect and language, and due to which there are problems, and the same word can mean different things at a different place, which leads to further barrier. Ambiguous language. Vague words lead to misinterpretation. When that word does not even exist and you keep on using it, so it's most probably many people don't know about it. What happens? It leads to the semantic barrier. Emotional triggers, as I mentioned, that words leads to emotional state, and that is where through semantic barrier or through semantics, a person reaches to the psychological barrier. Education and vocabulary level, complex words may confuse. So what happens? Everyone is not aware about all the words. Okay, maybe there are few words that I am not aware about, and you start throwing them on me. I won't be able to understand what you are trying to say to me. So that's when semantic barriers plays a role, and there is very less of communication, or rather I would say it is very ineffective communication. Then comes the cultural. We understood cultural means when the person falls under different culture, that leads to different barriers, that leads to the barriers to the communication. Now it arises due to differences in values, ethics, traditions, beliefs, gestures between the different cultures. Now my cultures, in my culture there might the meaning of thumbs up might be something else, but in your culture meaning of thumbs up might be something else, which could lead to misinterpretation of the message, and then it lead to the barrier. Now, what is polite in one culture may be offensive in another culture. There are high chances that what in my culture, if I do something that is polite, that is not rude, but in other culture it might be considered as rude. That is what cultural barrier is. Then how does it affect communication? Misunderstanding due to different cultural interpretation. Due to different culture, you are misinterpreting the message, and which leads to cultural barrier. Then comes organizational barriers. Now we have talked about flow of communication when we were talking about in the previous lecture about the different modes of communication. So in the organizational barrier, I said that there is one hierarchy. There is horizontal communication. Okay, when the communication goes from peer to peer. Then there is diagonal, when the communication goes from one department to another department but following the hierarchy. Then there is upward communication, and then there is downward communication. Okay, now this falls in an organization. This type of communication happens in organization. Okay, now what happens? These types of communication leads to some barrier. That barrier is organizational barrier. Okay, these are caused by the structure. Now this structure I am talking about. When upward is when you are talking from the lower to the higher, downward upper to lower. Now these hierarchies creates barriers. Okay, different rules are done, that you cannot speak to your senior, you cannot talk to this teacher at this time. There is a high possibility that you cannot reach to your teacher whenever you want. So there are few rules that we need to follow. Yes, it leads to barrier, but is that barrier leading to ineffective communication? We need to see. Hierarchy within an organization, as I mentioned, there is one hierarchy which leads to barrier. Now, too many layers of approval. Obviously, if you want to reach to the higher authority, you need so many approvals, which leads to barrier. Unclear policies. If there are few rules and regulations being made and the language is not correct, the information that has been delivered is not correct, leads to unclear policy, and that leads to organizational barrier. Or rigid channels slow down communication. Okay, someone who is very rigid and don't want to listen to you, and they have kept their channels so rigid that your information cannot come to them. That's when organizational barrier comes in hand, and it makes the communication less effective. Example, employee cannot directly share feedback with the CEO because of long hierarchy. Obviously, CEO is here and employee is here. Now to reach to the CEO, he has to pass through many hurdles. Now, till the time he reaches to that hurdle, the communication does not even need to be delivered. So that leads to the organizational barrier. Obviously, there are few hierarchies that are done, but there has to be some management so that this barrier could be resolved. How does it affect? Messages are delayed. As I told you, that employee wanted to send some message to CEO. Till the time he or she gets the chance to deliver it, the message is delayed or altered or lost in bureaucracy. Okay. Now comes the another Another barrier, let's talk about organizational barrier again. So we discussed that there are views and policies that causes organizational barrier. There are hierarchical position, there are organizational facilities and complex organizational structures. Then comes how to overcome these barriers. Now it's very important to understand that when we are if there is a problem, there needs to be some solution. Okay, so when we talk about the barriers that they are affecting the communication, they leads to misinterpretation of message, they lead to many problems, they are not letting the communication be effective, then we need to resolve them, or at least we try to overcome them. We cannot even if resolve them completely, then we try to overcome them. So the first one is active listening. Pay full attention and avoid interruption. For example, let's take example of a class. You are sitting in a class and you know that physical barrier is the high possibility that it could lead to ineffective communication. What you can do, you try to show your full capacity and full attention to the teacher so that there are no barrier and there is one active listening to it. Use simple and clear language, avoid jargon, use familiar word. For example, I am teaching here, I am playing a role. For example, I am teaching you and I start bombing so many hard words on you and you don't know the meanings of it. Will you be able to understand anything? No. So what, as a sender, what will be my responsibility? I will use simple and clear language so that my students can understand what I am trying to say. Provide feedback. Confirm understandings through two-way communication. Now, communication, I told you in the last lecture also, communication is a two-way process. It goes from sender to receiver and then receiver becomes the sender and comes to the, then I become the receiver and it comes to me. So, it's a two-way process. Now, if I have given you some information and you don't understand or you understood it properly but there is some clarification required, how it could be resolved? Through feedback. If you don't ask me or if you don't ask to the sender, the misinterpretation is the high possibility and it leads to the different barriers. So how can we resolve it? We provide feedback to the sender. Minimize physical distractions. If there is any noise, you ensure there is a proper environment. Be culturally sensitive, respect others' culture. Try to, if you cannot adapt it completely, but at least respect what others are saying, what culture they are coming from. Build trust and emotional connection with the people so that they can share what they want to share and there is no psychological barrier. Improve organizational communication, shorten hierarchy, ensure transparency. If there is more transparency, even if there is hierarchy, there is a high possibility there are no barriers left. Use visuals and non-verbal aids. Support messages with diagrams and gestures. Whenever you are communicating, if your face is blunt, you are showing no expressions, even if you are saying thank you, it would look like you are saying it very rudely. So what you can say, thank you. So it showcases that you are happy about it, and it not just verbal communication but non-verbal communication can also reduce barriers. And then be patient and respectful. If you don't understand something, be patient, try to understand, try to clarify, try to give feedback, and but in a very respectful manner. So what have we discussed? We discussed what is communication. That it is sharing the message. During this sharing message, there are barriers. These barriers hinders the effective communication, and that barriers are also called as noise. And they are of different types: physical, psychological, semantic, cultural, and organizational. And then we discuss what are the different methods to overcome these barriers. The methods were active listening, using simple and clear language, providing feedback, minimizing physical distractions, be culturally respectful and sensitive, build trust and emotional connections, improve hierarchy and or improve organizational communication, use visuals and non-verbal aids, and be patient and respectful. So that is what was for this lecture. Thank you for listening. Jai Hind.